So welcome everyone to a special edition of Agile Professionals Meetup. We're a little slim today. Loudoun County issued an emergency today saying go get supplies for the incoming storm. And I actually met a lot of people canceled out saying I have to go buy supplies. So
stock up on bread and water.
I'm happy you guys are here, but I think that's a little overreaction to go get supplies right now. We still have a couple of days, so.
That's where I'm going at 7.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, thank you for at least sharing some of your time before you go prepare for the storm. A little bit about REI Systems. REI Systems, we are a custom application development solutions contractor for the federal government mostly. We also have our own products around grants management. That's our specialty. And we also do open government solutions for the federal government. And I think this is the 3rd year we've been rated as top place to work by the Washington Post. And if you're interested in learning more, come look at the careers on our website. And we're always looking for, passionate, talented people. Today we have Josh Bruce, who is coming to share his story that he presented at Agile Midwest. He comes from a background of software development. Him and I go back a couple of years. We worked together for the federal government in coaching facility, kind of coaching technical teams. And so I kind of go way back, and I've always had really good conversations with him about how to improve things, and he's always thinking about ways to improve. He's actually not traditionally from like a information systems background. He actually comes from a liberal arts degree, and he's a philosopher. He's fine arts. Fine arts.
It's even worse than liberal arts.
And he likes to write about philosophy, and so I love the diverse perspective that he brings to the table. So, without further ado, I present you with Josh Bruce.
Thanks, everybody. All right, so thanks, Matthias. Thanks for hosting as well. And we'll just jump right into it. So this talk is actually brought to you by a mentality that I've started seeing in the Agile community a lot more, okay? And it's not to say that it's some kind of weird growing trend or anything like that, just that I'm becoming more sensitive to it, okay? So don't freak out. And the mentality looks something like this. Agile equals speed. Speed equals yes, have some. Or to put it another way, must go faster, right? And I hear it when people say things like Agile software development is all about speed, or that's why we do Agile in the first place, right? To go faster. But it's not just in the corridors and the conferences that I hear this mentality. It's actually in the way we name things as well. Velocity is probably the most obvious to me. Everybody's nodding, I love it. Dictionary definition of velocity is the speed of an object moving in a given direction. Right? And what's supposed to happen to velocity over time? Up, down, must go faster, right? So sort of seeing this really got me second guessing my relationship with Agile software development and my life choices related to it as well. What I thought Agile was all about, and even what was happening to me when I did it, right? Was I going faster? And the simple answer after having this existential crisis was no, right? Instead, it looks more like this. Complexity of future work decreases while the changeability of the system overall increases, okay? That's what's happening. So to put it another way, the system stops pushing back and resisting change, and instead starts pulling me along and almost helping me introduce change. Okay? So this is what's happening, but it's not how it's happening. Okay? It's a byproduct of what I am doing. And what I'm doing, I put under the general heading of principle-based development. Okay? which is to say that over the years, developers have come up with a plethora of principles and practices meant to make designing and developing systems easier. Okay? So the list that we're about to see, don't think of it as being an exhaustive list. Okay? Instead, think of it more of a, if I were stranded on a deserted island, these are the ones I'd want to have with me. Okay? Your list might be different. Okay? We're going to start with the principles. Now we're going to see these in action a lot more when we actually get into the story. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through them right now. The first one is don't repeat yourself, otherwise known as the dry principle. You aren't going to need it, otherwise known as Yagni. So I can tell some of the engineers in the room because they're all nodding. And then you have solid. Now solid is, there are 5 principles that have sort of been glued together by Uncle Bob Martin. Okay? But if you told me that I could only take one of those with me to that deserted island, I would take single responsibility every time. Okay? And what I like about these principles is that they're sort of atomic, which means that I can abstract, generalize, or even glue them together and end up at other principles and practices. Okay? And I do that a lot, and so we're going to see that a lot in the story. It's kind of how my brain works. So if you're tweaking out because of my reference to one of these and what's going on, let's talk about it later. So that's the principles, these are the practices. And we're going to start with Pragmatic Dave's Razor. Now this is a name I've given to a philosophical razor proposed by Pragmatic Dave Thomas in a blog post he wrote entitled, Agile is Dead, Long Live Agility. And it goes something like this. When presented with 2 or more alternatives of roughly equal value, choose the one that's easiest to change in the future. Okay? So if we were going to bifurcate this room, we could build a wall or we could buy a partition. If we determine that both of those have roughly the same value, we should buy the partition because it's going to be easier to change in the future. Okay? Next up is refactoring. Now the definition for refactoring that I'm going to use, I'm totally stealing from a book entitled Refactoring by Martin Fowler. And again, the engineering types are like, yeah, I know what he's about to say. And basically the definition goes like this. Refactoring is improving the internal structure of an existing system in such a way that we do not alter its external behavior. Okay? So to put it another way, I could completely rewrite your operating system, and as long as I left a few things alone, all I've done is refactor. Okay? Now compare that to re-engineering. Okay? Re-engineering, at least for our purposes, has a very similar definition. Improving the internal structure of an existing system in such a way that we do alter the external behavior. Okay? So if you're walking down the street and you learn some new piece of information and it causes you to interact with the outside world in a different way, you have just re-engineered your brain. Okay? Or transformed. Coaches like transformation. All right, so which brings us to the story. You guys read that, I'm gonna keep talking. So these principles and practices are things that you just keep doing. You're always doing, okay? But in the story, I'm gonna highlight certain ones in action, okay? Now, the story is the US Census Bureau's US population clock, okay? And this was and I did not work for the census, just, it's on camera. I did not work for the census. I worked for a company that was hired by the census. And it's a project that I was on around 2012, somewhere in that neighborhood. So I'm pretty sure all the NDAs have expired. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. And trying to figure out which one to say next. So I did write the majority of code for the things that we're going to see today, but I do want to say thank you for the API team out at the Census Bureau, as well as my coworkers who definitely did their fair share. Okay. Last but certainly not least, we actually do have an hour, so this might be a lie, but the story has definitely been edited for television. Okay? But I have tried to maintain the authenticity of the interactions that happened, as well as the accuracy of what's happening in the code behind what we're going to see. Okay? Well, what we're going to see, kind of. We had some technical difficulties, so we had to go to the backup slides. All right, so I'm sitting in my tech lead's office, and she hands me a comp, right? And I start looking it over, and it looks pretty much like this. Okay, there's some glaring differences, though. The world clock didn't exist yet, right? That whole half wasn't there. The US population just spanned that entire distance, okay? The odometer didn't actually spin, It was more like a digital odometer. It just kind of blinked different numbers. And the pyramid did not have the slider and the play button. Okay? It just displayed 1 year's worth of data, and that was it. Now it's about this time when Susie asked me, do you want it? And do you think you can get it done by this deadline? That deadline was about 12 weeks out. I said, well, I don't know. And that launched us into discovery mode, where I basically just asked a lot of questions and took a lot of notes. And when I started running out of questions, I said, now before I commit to this, I've got some concerns. One, I'm not really a JavaScript guy. And I've been doing development since 1998, and I have never once had a client who needed this much, nor to this type of JavaScript. Okay? So there's going to be a learning curve there. Two, I've never really played with SVGs, so the charts are also going to be a learning curve. Right? And three, I want to do it my way. And Susie says, okay, well, one, don't worry about the JavaScript thing. Patrick is essentially a JavaScript god, and he'll be here to help you whenever you need him. Right? Two, I wouldn't worry too much about the SVG thing either. When I asked Patrick if he actually had the time to do this, he found a library that does SVGs, so you can just use that. And three, I don't really know what you mean by do it your way. You're not converting the department to an Agile shop. Right? Like, that's not happening. The Census Bureau is doing Agile, but that's not us. And I said, yeah, no, from a project management perspective, I totally agree. That's a much bigger transformation. Nobody's got time for that, right? But from an engineering perspective, I think it could be helpful for us to start doing some of the things that are more agile in nature. Because, and don't take this as a harsh criticism, right? Famous last words. Right? Don't take this as a harsh criticism. I've been here for about 3 or 4 months, and I've worked with all the other devs, and I've also been sort of on bug detail, right? Which is great. You know, new guy learning things, you don't want the new guy breaking things, cool, understand. But that means that I've also seen a lot of the code that we've written over the years, right? And it seems like our general MO is to go as fast as we can, Hulk smash our way to the approximation of a solution, and not worry about the detritus we leave behind. I try to walk a different path. And maybe after this project, some of the other developers, if it's successful, some of the other developers will want to walk this path as well. And she said, oh, that? I don't care about that, just as long as you get it done by the deadline. And I said, oh, okay, thanks, I'll take it. Grab my notes, grab the comp, headed straight for Patrick. And I get there and I'm like, hi, can you show me how to do object-oriented design and development in JavaScript, like even if that's possible, right? Because I had no idea. And Patrick said, yes, it's possible in JavaScript's own way, anyway. And basically just kind of walked me through how to do that. Right? So I headed back to my desk, and what I had decided that I was going to do is I was going to implement each one of these components in turn from the least complex to the most complex, at least in my mind. Right? So what that meant was starting with the odometer. I actually thought that would be the easiest way to go about this. And what I wanted to do with the odometer, and really all of the components if I could, was I wanted to use every abstraction I could think of the single responsibility principle and apply it to that component. Right? So that meant it was going to be encapsulated. It was going to be decoupled, or at least loosely coupled. Right? It was going to follow the law of Demeter. Right? It was going to use some form of model view controller. And not only that, but I was going to be able to use it in other projects. So it couldn't know anything about the pop clock itself, or the Census Bureau, or its APIs, or any of that. Right? And as soon as I made that design decision, like Taylor's like trying to program it in his head. He's like writing the code. I can see it. And as soon as I made that design decision, right, I needed an object that was specific to the pop clock, knew how to do all this stuff. So I created this thing called a page controller, right? And basically its single responsibility, going back to the principles, its single responsibility was to instantiate all the components on the page, call all the APIs that it needed, and then pass the data on to the components, right? Just as a complete pass-through. so that the components could deal with it in a very self-managing, self-organizing kind of way. So when it comes to the odometer, the way this works is basically you can pass it a number between 0 and whatever, and pass it a speed from 0 to whatever, and it figures its life out, right? So the other part, so once the odometer actually gets, or the odometer controller, I should say, gets that number, it passes it to the view, and that view passes it through a method that is probably the only time I'm actually going to use the literal definition of one of these principles. So a method, according to single responsibility, a method should have only one job. And this method that's inside of the view for the odometer has one job. It's to take that number, convert it to a string, and add commas. That's its job. And it returns the string, and the view displays it. Now, the odometer also has an animator. Every once in a while it'll fire, and it'll tell the controller, hey, you need to update that digit. And the controller updates it, passes it to the view passes it through the method, and displays it. Right? Simple enough. So that's that, which means we can move on to the bars. Right? Now, the bars is something of a misnomer, because don't repeat yourself, right? This is not the same code copied and pasted over and over again, right? I did not do that. What I did is I created a single bar definition that is very similar to the odometer. It can take a percent, it can take a speed, and it figures its life out from there, right? And it also had that animator, right? Where every once in a while it would fire and the progress bar would change. Now at that point we are sacrificing don't repeat yourself, right? Because we have an animator in the odometer and an animator in the bar. But I was willing to sacrifice don't repeat yourself at the page or system level in order to maintain that strict single responsibility at the component level, right? To be able to take those anywhere I wanted to without other code. Unfortunately, when I had the page controller instantiate 4 of these things, the system said, I don't care, right? And it pushed back really hard, okay? The odometer would pause for like 3 or 4 seconds, and then all of a sudden it would catch up with itself and skip like 20 digits. The bars would just constantly jump back and forth. It was the best breakdancing I'd ever seen. So what I needed to do was pull that out, right? So I refactored out that animator logic and I put it into the global scope by creating an animator object. Fancy that. But I wanted it to be loosely coupled again. So I didn't want that animator to know anything about the actual components here, and I didn't want the components really to know anything about that actual implementation of an animator. And so what I ended up doing is I grabbed a delegate pattern from Objective-C and modified it just a little bit and put it inside the animator. So the components that care about time could register with the animator, and the animator just calls a method on all of its delegates, a known method. So once I did that, all the animations were clean. Right? So then I scrolled down and decided to tackle the tab tables. Right? Now, again, don't repeat yourself. There's one definition of a table sitting over here that the page controller then creates 2 instances of, and then gives it the data that it needs in order to display. Right? In the middle, you'll notice that those are it's a comma delimited number. Right? This is a solved problem. The only problem is that it's hidden inside of the odometer. Right? So we could have copied and pasted the odometer or the comma delimiter method that we talked about before into the table, but I decided this time just to refactor it out and put it into the global scope again. Make the table use that, make the odometer use that, and we call it a day. So tables are done. Now the last one, or rather the next one I should say, is the population on a date component. And the way that this works is that there's a button and a link here, and when you click on one of these, it presents this date picker. Right? And then you select one of the dates, and it updates the population on that date. Well, the population is a comma delimited number. That's a solved problem. No real new complexity there, which just leaves the complexity of the date picker. Now, the complexity of the date picker is, am I going to make my own, or am I going to grab one from the community? Right? And what is the value proposition of doing either? I decided I had neither the time or the inclination to build another date picker. I've done that enough times in my life, and I didn't have any code lying around to just easily port one over. And so it's definitely going back to the community. But anybody who has done modern web development, especially with JavaScript involved, knows that there's like 50,000 of these things. to pick from, right? How do you pick? Pragmatic Dave's razor, right? So we were already using jQuery to do a lot of our API calls, as well as to help us with some asynchronous behavior that we have, right? Well, the jQuery community also has this thing called jQuery UI, which is a bunch of UI components, right? And so it would be, it would take a very minimal amount of extra code to go ahead and add one from jQuery UI. And that's how we made our decision. So this is a jQuery UI date component, and we did sacrifice the aesthetic continuity, right? Because when this thing is being displayed, it's definitely easy to tell which one of these things is not like the others, right? And we told the Census Bureau about it, and they said, you know, don't worry about it, we'll make a ticket. If it ever becomes a priority, we'll change it. That was 6 years ago. I still haven't changed it, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. Just saying, like, that's where we're at, right? So there we go. At this point, I am enthused. I am very, very happy. Because we're basically done with everything except for the chart-based components. And when I told Susie that I thought I could get it done by that deadline, I actually thought I could get it done 3 or 4 weeks ahead of that deadline. Okay? But things were going so smooth that I now thought I could get done 4 or 5 weeks ahead of that deadline. Okay? I was cooking. Now, just to give you guys a context, we've been doing this for about 45 to 50 days at this point. Right? That's including all the stuff that doesn't exist in this telling of the story. Right? And every day, Susie and I had a meeting, sort of to check status and see where things were. And over time, it became sort of like our own daily stand-up, even though she wasn't really into the Agile thing. Right? And unfortunately for me, it also became, after about day 5, it also became like my own personal Groundhog Day, because they all kind of went down like the one that happened this day. She comes over to my computer, and I show her all the things that had happened since the last time we talked. I showed her all the things I was thinking about doing before the next time we talked, and I brought up any questions, comments, concerns, conversations that I thought needed to happen before future work coming down the line, right? Then she would look at my screen, she would look at the comp, and she would say, Josh, I'm really concerned that you're not going to make it by the deadline. You really need to go faster. I would get a little defensive because I would say, you know, no, I think we're going to get done about 4 or 5 weeks ahead of the deadline. The code's a lot cleaner, it's more reusable, all the typical stuff. But eventually, the conversation would devolve to the point that Susie would just sort of throw up her arms and say, all right, fine, whatever, do it your way. And she'd go back to her office. And then I would get back to work. So welcome to 15 minutes a day on my life for about a month. So that means going on to the charts. And I decided to start with the pyramid chart. And so the way the pyramid chart works, forget that's there. So the way the pyramid chart works is that basically you mouse over it, and each one of the bars, and they expand and they show the labels and that sort of thing. When you mouse out, they go back to being normal. Now the reason that I chose that one over the line chart is because it's pretty much just an exercise in drawing. Okay? Once I had all the static content laid out, so all the graphics and the ruler and everything like that, it's basically just one bar that has 2 sub-bars with 3 labels in it. Right? So when the page controller hands it the data that it needs, the pyramid increments over that data and instantiates a new bar for each one, passing it the data that that bar needs to do its job. So pretty simple, simple, air quotes. Which brings us to the most complex component. In the beginning, this was the most complex component. By the time we actually got here, it's actually dead simple. Okay? So with regard to the chart, Susie and I had a conversation that I was concerned about having to draw that chart. And she went out and found a line chart made by the same people who made the SVG library that we're using. So I got to use that. The data that the census gave us, we had to manipulate in order to make it a stacked line chart instead of just a regular line chart. Right? And the census didn't want us manipulating data, fully understand that. They ended up building us an endpoint specifically for this chart, so that was all on them, nothing new for us. Basically what I'm driving at is when it comes to SVG stuff, the hardest part was this little call out, because I'm having to do the math to actually draw the path. Right? It's not just a shape that exists somewhere. Which brings us back to HTML. The legend is HTML, pretty dead simple to do that. The real hero here though is the popover, or the overlay, I guess I should say. And that's because it pretty much wrote itself before I got here. So to break that down, the first column is just a string. The web is kind of built specifically to display strings, so not hard to display a string. The next column over is a comma delimited number. We already have that solved, so no new complexity there. The next column is a set of bars. Well, just instantiate a bar from what was up above there and give it a different percent and a speed of 0 and you're good to go, right? Next column over is displaying the percent that we used in the bar. I already have the percent, I just need to display it. And we already talked about this. The web is made to display text. So yeah, this whole thing just became as easy as the odometer by the time I got here, right? So I'm pretty enthused, right? Because we're just over 4 weeks before the deadline, and we're done. With the initial set of requirements laid out by that comp, we are done. So I put it up on a demo server, told Susie about it. Susie went up to the Andes. The owners of the company were both named Andy, and they worked on the floor above us. So every once in a while, she would have to go up and talk to the Andes and the rest of the creative department, right? And show them what we had done. And then she would come down and she would give us feedback. And a couple hours later, she did come down and she started making a beeline for me. Now make no mistake, there were moments before this and after that I thought I was getting fired. Either on the day, or right after I got done with this. Right? But today was probably the most intense. Because she gets to my desk and she says, see, this is why we do development the way we do around here. We go as fast as we can to get done as early as we can so that when we show this stuff to other people, especially the Andes, and they want to change stuff, because they always want to change stuff, we have time to increment those changes before the deadline without working nights and weekends. I don't think you have that luxury anymore with this change. And I did tell the Andes that this is going to take you forever because you're such a freaking perfectionist and you won't let it go. They said they didn't care. So if you do end up working nights and weekends, don't come complaining to me because I did everything that I could. And the next time you decide that you want to criticize somebody for the way that they do something, you might want to consider all the reasons that they have for doing it. Because you might find one or two that you appreciate enough to just do it their way. Because when it comes to software development, we do have a very good reason for doing it the way we do. We like to go home at night. I love how everybody's in like stunned silence. It's great. So the Agile coach, Scrum Master, like team member side of me is like, oh my God, this is the greatest retro ever, right? Like her statements are just so dense with opportunities for improvement for like me, for her, for us, for the team, for the department, for the company, and dare I say like the world, right? It's like, I really want to have this conversation, right? But when she had come down to me, she was walking in this sort of mix between a street fighter approaching her opponent and a whipped dog. And that street fighter side of her was staring into my soul going, I dare you. So I took a different tack and just asked the obvious question. What do they want to change? And she says they want to make it a real odometer. I said, okay, well that's about 1 or 2 days. Where's the other 4 weeks? And she goes, no, that's the only change. But there's no way you can get that done in 1 or 2 days. A convincing odometer, right? You need a strip of numbers, a shadow, and a mask. And she says, yeah, but how do you make the numbers look like they're going back into space? I said, well, you really don't have to. Because one, most users aren't going to care. Right? They're not paying that close attention. They're just going to look at the number anyway. 2, when it comes to an odometer, the foreshortening on a number is not that great, right? Because the discs are really small, and before it gets to the most extreme position, it falls off the back, comparatively speaking, from where people are looking. And 3, your brain is very adept at changing your perception of the world based on your expectation of the world. So as long as you've seen a spinning odometer before, chances are your brain will actually start to warp those numbers, even just a little bit. Right? And she goes, okay, well, that may be, but I know the Andes, and they're going to want that 3D solution. So the Agile software developer in me is like, well, hey, let's invoke customer collaboration. Can we just go talk to the Andes? Because it really sounds like we're missing somebody from this conversation, right? But looking back at her, I could see that the whipped dog side of her was like, listen, I'm spent. Don't you dare ask me to go back up there. So I took a different tack and I said, okay, listen, let me do the 2-day solution, take it up to the Andes. If they don't like it, come back down, we'll talk about it. Right? Losing 2 days is a drop in the bucket compared to 4 weeks. And if they like it, right on, crisis averted, right? And she basically just said, all right, fine, whatever, do it your way, and headed to her office. Right? And so I ran straight to Tammy, my favorite graphics lady, and we had a really great conversation. By the end of it, we both had a strip of numbers, one for her to do designing things with, and one for me to do developer things with. Ran back to my desk, and I created a digit object. Right? So basically the digit object, single responsibility, manage those 3 images, and then also be able to accept an arbitrary number between 0 and 10, so that you could set it to whatever you wanted it to be. Right? Then I re-engineered the odometer to basically instantiate a bunch of those digits, right? Because don't repeat yourself. I didn't copy and paste 9 digits to figure this out, right? I let the odometer deal with it. And so that worked. Put it up on the demo server. Susie took it up to the Andes, and the Andes said, good job. And they sent it off to the census. I went back to bug detail. Hey. And a few days later, Susie comes over to my desk, and she says, see, I'm telling you, we work in a fast-paced environment. You need to go faster, because the Census Bureau now wants to make some changes too. And I don't think you're going to get it done in the time we have left. So, Agile software developer side of me is thinking, okay, well, accept changing requirements even late in development. Right? That's fair. Also, step away from the manifesto, the concept of a fixed time box with a variable scope inside of it. Right? They've got 3 weeks left, basically. If they want to spend those 3 weeks adding value to their product and to their users, I'm all for it. I applaud them. Now, if any one of those ideas starts to stretch beyond that time box, well, that's a different conversation, right? We're going to have to renegotiate and talk about variable scope and all that. So I just asked Susie, like, okay, so what do they want to change? And she says they want to have a world clock with an odometer and data underneath it. They want the death bar, you can't see it here because technical difficulties, but they want the death bar to go down instead of up. Right? Not only that, but they want the slider to have, or they want this pyramid to have a slider and a play button that will allow users to scrub through years of data. And I thought about it for a minute and I said, okay, well, that's about 3 or 4 days. She was like, there is no way that you can get that done in 3 or 4 days. You know what? Never mind. All right, fine, whatever. Do it your way. So yeah, that's where we were. Now, so the thing about it is the world population is pretty much already done for us. Building a table inside of HTML is pretty dead simple. We already have a reusable odometer. We just need a page controller to instantiate it and give it new data. Basically, at that point, the world clock is all on the API. They're the ones who have to develop everything. The bar, the death bar, It's model view controller. The controller is already doing math to make it look like it's going up. I just need to change the math to make it look like it goes down. It was multiplying by negative something, -1. I can't remember what I multiplied by, or multiplied it against, but that's what it was. Which leaves us with the pyramid. And the pyramid becomes something, at least from my perspective, as like a coach human thing. This is the most interesting component now. Because basically you're gonna get to see a team form right before your eyes. It's gonna be great. And it's 7 o'clock, isn't it?
No, I stayed later. You were that enthralled.
What? All right. Well, I'm gonna do this while you're doing that. Sorry if my throat's more scratchy than normal. All right, so the slider is a standalone component. Right? So we want to be encapsulated, decoupled, all that, right? So we don't want it to know anything about the pyramid. We don't want it to know about anything about the pop clock. We can't have it know anything about the page controller, right? But we need it to be able to talk to the page controller at the end of the day, because the page controller has a single responsibility of handing data over to this thing, right? Well, we already have that solved. Delegate pattern from the animator, right? Just copy paste that into the slider. Oh, and this, don't repeat yourself, right? It's the same one that's over here, just a different instance of it. So now that we have that, we have a way to communicate with the page controller, because the page controller registers as a delegate of the slider. And every time we slide this thing back and forth, it tells the page controller, hey, my number changed. And the page controller goes, okay, that goes with this data, a pyramid, update using that. Right? So moving on to the play button. The play button by itself is basically an on-off switch. Right? So while it's playing, it has to look like a pause button. And while it's paused, it has to look like a play button, right? On-off. But it also has to know, it has to do something over time. Well, we already have the answer to that, right? Register as a delegate of the animator. And every time the animator says, hey, time passed, all of its delegates get to decide what they're going to do about it. The play button is basically going to go, am I playing? Yes. Okay. Hey, slider, can you go up 1? Thanks. And the slider's going to go up 1. And then the slider's going to say, hey, my value changed to all of its delegates. And the page controller is going to go, that goes with this data. Hey, pyramid, use this instead. And the pyramid updates itself. So now we have a team of all of these independent components working together specifically to update that pyramid, right, at the end of the day. So, yeah, awesome. So I got that finished. Put it up on the demo server. Susie took it up to the Andes, and Andy sent it off to the census. And I did not go back to bug detail. They actually started trusting me with real projects. And so I started working on those. But a couple days later, Susie comes over to my desk and she says, this is getting old. And I was just like, what's that? She said, well, they want to change more stuff. They only got about a week left. I don't think we have enough time to do it, but you haven't missed one of your estimates yet, so I figured I would ask you first. And I said, oh, wow, thanks. I appreciate that. That's what I said on the outside. On the inside, I'm like doing cartwheels and backflips and front flips and screaming, oh my God, somebody finally asked me. And I was like, well, what do they want to change? And she says, so they want all the components to have a popover with a snapshot of that component inside of it. And then they want to have ways to share it with people, like email, printing, that kind of a thing. And then the one that scares the hell out of me, they want their users to be able to embed it into their own websites. Now, for those of you who don't know, I also have a user experience background. So the user experience side of me is going, do their users even want to do that? Like, have they checked? I hope they'll at least use this functionality, and they do, to give them credit. So, but I didn't say that. I was not in a position to do that. And basically I told her, you know what, yeah, that's probably going to take about a week. I said, but I don't think I should be the one to do it. Because the hardest part is actually going to be the popover and the sharing. And you don't need to have intimate knowledge of the system overall to do that. Right? And I'm working on these other projects that I would like to not get behind on because they were already behind in the first place. And she goes, hang on, time out, back up. I thought the components would have been the harder part. And I said, well, no, because the way we develop them is using all of these principles and practices. So when they're not actually alive or anything like that, they have absolutely no preconceived notions about the outside world whatsoever. It's only when we actually instantiate them that they start executing their internal logic and rules, right? And the first thing that they do when they're born is go, where am I? And how big is it, right? And they draw themselves based off of that reality to fit that world. Now we can give them external data and everything like that, and they'll modify here and there, but they still have just that internal set of rules and logic. So this popover, it's just another instance of this object. It's chilling over here, and we give it the same data that we give it over here, right? It won't look the same, but it'll at least work, right? So I'm gonna step away from the drama for just a second. Remember when I said complexity decreases, complexity of future work decreases? There's actually a point that you can hit if you do this well, air quotes, where basically complexity kind of goes under the waterline and you basically just kind of have features lying about the place waiting to be discovered and implemented or asked for from a user, right? You don't have to do anything to get them. Embedding it in somebody else's website is one of the examples of that, right? Because we already figured out that this is going to be able to figure its life out based on whatever container we throw it in. Because of single responsibility, we also made it very modular. So each one of these components is set up using separate JavaScript files, right? So when the user embeds this component, they're just grabbing the JavaScript they need, not the entire pop clock. Right? So it literally was already done before we even got here, before anybody asked for it. All right, so back to the drama. Susie says, okay, I don't believe you, but I'm gonna trust you, and I'm just gonna watch. And so we did grab another developer. He did a bang-up job on getting that popover in place and everything like that. Didn't need much help from me, in fact. But the real hero is actually Susie for this entire week. Because she would basically spend about an hour or two with us, like 20, 30 minutes here and there. And she would ask us questions. Why are you doing this? Why did you decide to put that there? Why did you write it this way? Right? She's trying to up her game based off of us instead of doing it in a vacuum. So I really appreciate that. I'm gonna give her mad props for it. So anyway, we get this done. Put it up on the demo server. Susie takes up the Andes. Andes sends it off to the Census Bureau. Right? Census Bureau gives us a big virtual high five. The Andes give us 2 thumbs up. And Susie gives us a big pat on the back. And donuts. Don't forget the donuts. If your developers are anything like me, they forget to eat on the regular. Right? Like, that happens. So, bring it back to the slides. Ooh, slides. Yeah. So 6 years later, not much has changed about that code. There are some noticeable changes, but at the core, it's pretty much the same. Did I go faster? The question at hand. Did I go faster? I would submit no. Much to the frustration of my technical lead, I did not go faster. In fact, I might even argue that I did exactly what Agile software development tells us to do by way of the manifesto. So the manifesto, everybody knows the manifesto, right? Yes. 16 elements, right? 4 values, 12 principles. There's a principle down here. And it's the only one of all 16 elements that has language related to speed. Not time and time boxes. Speed. And it says, Agile processes promote sustainable development. The second sentence says, developers, sponsors, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Not faster, not slower, constant pace indefinitely. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to go at a pace that was comfortable for me, that I could maintain forever. Right? Now, just problem, solution, problem, solution. Now, if it ever got to the point where I couldn't maintain that cadence, right, where it took too long to solve a problem, then I would go and ask for help, right? Because that's an impediment. You don't have to wait for your daily to talk about impediments. If something took me longer than I think like an hour or two to solve by myself, I would stop and I would go get help. Right? This is like the basis of pair programming and mob programming. Right? Everybody's already there. So no, I did not go faster. And to finish closing it out, we'll go back to the original mentality. Agile equals speed. Speed equals yes, have some. Well, after all this reflection and like, existential crisis and things like that, I would humbly submit an alternative. Agility plus productivity plus courageous collaboration equals yes, have some. And that might just equal agile software development. Skeptical faith. Cool. So we got questions. We actually have time. We should anyway.
Sure.
Whether we have the energy, I don't know.
So what did Susie do in this whole process?
What do you mean?
Well, from what I heard, you executed the project, and I never heard you say, well, other than this admonishment to go faster. You said she's a tech lead. So what'd she do?
Oh, yeah. I tried to put like one or two in there, but I couldn't fill in other things. But no, she's the one who found the line chart for us. There's a line chart component that I didn't have to write. I'm not saying these are big things. I'm just saying that, yeah, I saw the face. I'm just saying that she did actually try to help us every once in a while, like with removing impediments. I think there were 6 of us, 6 or 7 of us. So she was also helping. She seemed to be more, or have more knowledge about server setup and that sort of a thing. So she was really helping with the new server person that ran all of our stuff, right? So she didn't know much about, especially front-end development. So that could also be why there wasn't a lot of participation from her. But
Did you
So what do you
change
think?
your mind about Agile?
did I change my mind about Agile?
Did you change her?
No, she left actually. So.
Imagine that.
Well, that's a much longer story that has to do with working nights and weekends. So, no, I did not change her mind. Having said that, all the other devs, funny story, we actually did put up like a Kanban board with all of our projects, and the new tech lead that came in, which was one of us, promoted one of us, right? Who came in, really liked the idea of having a Kanban. We'd have a daily stand-up, like all sorts of stuff. So I did manage to affect change in the department, but not with her specifically.
What was her specific objection?
I don't know. I think the Andes, the creative department was also up there, but there was also, that's where all the project managers were. And I think that's where she didn't know how to deal with that, right? She didn't know how to play by the rules that she perceived to exist. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. So we have a department specifically set up to do project management. You are the developers. What gives you the right to be able to do project management? We have an entire department for that. There's an entire set of people. And from her perception, basically, anything related to project management is outside the domain of us, right? Even if we could do it inside of that world, right? Because that's what we ended up doing.
That went to my first question. So if there was no interaction,
No interaction where?
I asked you what Susie did. You said effectively nothing, right? So if
she did our demos.
So let's put this into some UML, right?
Yeah.
So there was no connection. They were independent entities, right? So you're saying you have a project management group and you had developers, and you had basically had nothing in between. Because I could see if you had enforced governance, if somebody was coming to you saying, you know, you must fill in these forms or produce this Gantt chart or whatever, but it's just sort of hard to understand. You know, it's like somebody saying, you know, no one will bring a tomato into the building. You know, you say, why? And there is no answer.
There were not a lot of answers for why, but most people didn't ask why. This was a very ad hoc organization. Even the project management was ad hoc. It was more, they were BD, business developers, yeah. More so, like they were client managers, not this needs to be done on this day and this is dependency checking and critical chain. Like, no. It was literally just a get it out the door and get it done. Yeah, it was an interesting time of my life. I'm curious what skeptical face has to say. Yeah.
I just think that the whole speed thing, you know, because I started programming in the 80s, so you know, it's been a whole evolution of how things are done, and I guess I can see it being faster in the long run.
Right.
Yeah, you know, but yeah, not in your immediate thing, because what would happen is you'd give them something they didn't really, not quite what they thought they wanted. Maybe what they said they wanted, but not what they wanted, and there'd be change orders over, and there'd be different things. So
yeah,
I see it being faster, but maybe that's what I was.
Yeah.
Faster in a different way, not immediate though.
Right. And that's sort of the thing, is that you have to have a historical point against which to compare. In order to have speed, there has to be something in the past against which to compare. Right? And that's one of the reasons that I think velocity is a particularly interesting metric, especially depending on how you actually implement it. Because I've seen a lot of implementations that do not have a unit of one that gets carried from one to the next to the next to the next. But the only way to measure speed is to have a non-arbitrary unit of time and distance. And our distance, those points, they're arbitrary, and they can adjust unless you have a concentration. And I think the Agile Alliance does a good job of talking about this is the only way to measure speed using velocity. So, sorry, I forgot to take a drink of water.
What MVC were you using?
Are you a JavaScript developer?
Yeah.
Okay. I was not using a framework.
Cool. Sweet that ass.
Thanks. Considering especially since I have no idea how to do JavaScript, or at least I didn't at the time. But yeah, no, it was. That's why I was like, it's going to be kind of like MVC, because with Objective-C you get it for free, right? Like it's part and parcel with the ecosystem. But with JavaScript, you don't. And so I think in some cases, it's not actually three separate objects. It's actually like a method that deals with the view part and like rendering the HTML. But yeah, there's no framework.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
Thanks. Cool or crazy?
Both.
We did the same thing for in my previous jobs where we did use MVC, but we were using a Qt framework for doing, and the entire coding was in C++.
Yeah.
So in C++, and then we used Qt framework for the GUI-based side, the business logic, and then there was the database end as well. And we were using the entire MVC architecture in that. Everything was in, and there was no particular framework that you could reference as.
Right. Just kind of making it up.
Just making it up. Yes, into a model view
Ooh,
controller.
that's scary.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, But if you think about it, it's not that scary.
It's not.
It's an object that deals with data, an object that controls communication, and an object that controls views.
That really is it.
That is it.
Really frankly. So yeah.
That makes sense.
So when you ask that question literally, I go like, what framework would you be referring to? Because that's what we ended up doing in C++ too.
Yeah. But yeah, there was nothing about the environment that actually forced it. Right? It wasn't like Angular, for example. Right?
Yeah.
Because Angular forces, yes, Angular forces MVC,
Yeah.
or at least their version.
Yeah.
So which framework are you typically using?
So I've been using React. And,
Okay.
it's awesome. They make it
Yeah.
super easy to do stuff like that. To organize it anyway.
Yeah, no, and React is mainly the view part, right?
Yeah. And so that'll be inside of like the Merge stuff, like Mongo for the database, Express and Node.js.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well done.
It's fun.
Yeah, I actually created React-ish in PHP. Funny story.
Oh.
No, it actually wasn't too bad. It was basically, it's one object, and what you can do is, so just like in React, you have create element, and then the element name, and then the attributes, and then, content. Is content last? I think content's last, because I think that's weird.
Like components?
Well, so like if you have a paragraph, you have to do create element, paren, p, comma, and then the attributes that could be inside of it, ID, class, and so on, and then comma, what the content of the paragraph is.
I've never been in PHP, so I'm kind of understanding.
Well, no, that I'm asking you actually about React.
Oh,
This is the way React works, right?
Sure, yeah.
So the way this works is that you can call a method that is actually just the HTML element or any XML element that you want. Same thing with React, right? So you can say p paren, and then here's the content, and then close paren, and then here are all the attributes. And so yeah, like I had no idea that's how React worked, but I was sitting there playing with something, and anyway, find me on GitHub, follow that link, and you'll see the 3 projects that I got related to HTML generation. Yeah. I know you got something. Come on.
I was just mulling over the current company that I'm working for. They're very new to Agile, or they're switching over to Agile now. They've tried that in the past and it failed terribly because I think the upper management was not very supportive of it. But now the push down is coming from the CDO. So it's being adopted. But the reason I came to this one specifically, I made sure that I'm able to make it, was this concept of increased speed in Agile, and that's how it's being pushed down. And there are people who've been in the company for 30 years, 25, 30 years, who can't just get over that idea, and they are using speed as this thing. Hey, the developer should be able to speed up their development, right? And that's the only thing they're thinking about agility. And then the other aspect that they use it, Agile environment, is, oh, hey, we can continue to change requirements as you're developing. That does not mean Agile.
Well, and no, that's a good point, because that's the way you have to sell it to leadership a lot of times, right? There's a reason I picked Jurassic Park, right? Your competition is that T-Rex breathing down your neck. You've got to go faster. You've got to go faster, and that's how we sell it to upper management. Now, the idea is that it's sort of I don't want to say the idea because I want to talk for other people. What I have heard other people say is that it's kind of a bait and switch. You say, look, this is going to make you go really, really fast, and you're going to kick your competition's butt, right? Then when you actually get to the teams, you're like, hey guys, this is all you. What do you want to do? Which brings us to this slide, actually.
There was a huge cost with Rework because you could lose the guarantees on loans. So they said, well, we're not going to measure just the number of widgets, but it was a matter of the output. So in other words, if I did 10 crappy things, and so effectively I only did 5 correct, my number should be 5 divided, by the unit of time. Because you're trying to figure out your output, and I think the whole thrust of Agile is to become more proficient. In other words, to make better use of the time applied, not to reduce the time in total.
I think that's, yeah, I can see that. At least I can't argue with it yet. I'll think about it later.
One of the things that did help me is in one of our Agile meetups, I had this demonstration that you guys know that coin game wherein each developer flips a coin, passes around, and then the concept of speed, how you have increased the speed is in that entire process and not just each developer increasing their own speed. So by using those kind of games, or by as a team, how many requirements can you get in? Say, for example, there are 4 people giving requirements to a product owner. That's another game that is played. So there are these several different games that you can play. So I've tried to incorporate those kind of games as a fun way of them making them understand these various different concepts. Otherwise, they just don't.